Alright, so I'm back on YouTube yet again for my 31st YouTube video. And this is a big one because normally I just do a vlog about different things like my day or Survivor related videos or who I predict will win, etc., etc. Today, I'm here to talk to you guys about the biggest, most insanity tribal council there has ever been in the history of Survivor franchise. And that vote was Fraser Lack on Survivor, Australian Survivor, Heroes versus Villains. The season that George had almost won and probably should have won, especially after making that move to get Fraser out. Before I mention, though, all of the voting and whatnot, I wanted to discuss who was on that tribe. There were 7 people: George, Shawnee, and Liz, which were a trio. Then we have 2 other people, which was a duo of Simon and Stevie. And then we have the other 2, Fraser and Jordy. There was a lot of feud going on and a very heated topic of Simon and George wanting to vote each other out. And it looked like going into Tribal at the last moment that it was going to either be George or Simon that was the one voted out. And I already told you where the alliances were. There was Simon and Stevie on one side. There was Fraser and Jordy, who were kind of in the middle, but were also an alliance. And then there was the trio of Liz, Shawnee, and George. And of course, George was the target for one side, which was Simon and Stevie, because they saw him as the bigger threat out of the 3, Liz, Shawnee, and George. So they saw George as the biggest target. Little did they know that George actually had an idol, and it could only be used for that one tribal council. So here's where it gets really insane and more complicated. George wanted to get Simon out and thought he had the numbers 5-2 with 4-3. No, sorry, George thought he could get Simon out. Yeah, George thought he could get Simon out 5-2. And technically he wasn't wrong in a way, because Fraser and Jordy were considering it to get Simon out. But Simon thought he was going to blindside George with an idol in his pocket, or if he didn't even know he had an idol, 4-3, and he thought it would blindside Shawnee and Liz. So what would happen is, in the first round of voting, George stood up and played his hidden immunity idol, which could only be played for 1 round. But before any of that actually happened, there was a twist. Going into Tribal Council, it seemed so certain that George or Simon would be the next to go with all their conflict, and it seemed like everyone just put it to an end. But there was a twist. 1 person out of the 7 on the losing tribe would win individual immunity. And Simon had a fake hidden immunity idol. So even if he had played it for himself or not, he would still be voted out, right? Wrong, because he had 1 individual immunity. So George's plan and the rest of the tribe's plan to get rid of Simon, with the exception of Stevie, went foiled pretty much. So there's that. They couldn't get rid of Simon, whether he played the fake hidden immunity idol or not anyways, because he won individual immunity. So since Simon and Stevie were obviously going to be writing George's name down, the other 5 were thinking, who do we vote for? And since Simon is immune with his immunity necklace, the only other option is to write his closest ally Stevie down. So now Stevie would go home by default because Simon is safe. Here's where it gets more complicated, though. At Tribal Council, George plays his hidden immunity idol to insanity. Even though George knows he's not going home, he says, there's one night I can play it. And he actually says to Simon, who he dislikes, but makes a good point, that Geordie has been playing everyone. And Geordie is the one who told everyone about Simon's idol. So you can play it for Stevie. Stevie would be safe too with 5 votes. George would be safe with 2 votes. And both idols would be played, and we can help get rid of Geordie in the revote. So that's when George asked Simon, are you playing your idol for Stevie or not? Because if not, Stevie goes home. And Simon reluctantly said that, and apologized to Stevie, saying that there's no way I can play my idol for you because that's what George wants. And I'm not going to let George dictate my game. So he chose not to play his idol. Now this is the part where, if he did play his idol, I actually thought, in my opinion, that they could have just gone 4 votes on Shawnee or Liz. Because if the 4 had stayed and it was against the 3, let's say it was 4 votes for George and 3 votes for Stevie, that did not count. They could just revote and they can vote out Shawnee or Liz. But it turns out that Fraser and Geordie both voted Stevie anyways. So the choices were, play it for Stevie or Stevie goes home. Simon said, very sorry, Steve, but I'm not going to play my idol on you. To a selfish move, Simon then chose not to play his idol for Steve, risking Steve's fate. There were 2 votes for George that did not count. And even though Stevie got 2 votes, this is where it gets more crazy. Stevie's actually the one that didn't go home. But Geordie didn't go home either. The 3 votes went to Fraser, and Fraser went home out of nowhere. All because they wanted to do the least obvious, just in case Geordie had an idol or an advantage or something. They want to make it less obvious. And Fraser could have worked with Stevie and Simon if Geordie was the one voted out. Then Fraser would have turned to their side. So that's why they voted Fraser out, is because they wanted to make it less obvious, and they thought Fraser might work with the other 2, Simon and Stevie. But it turns out they voted Fraser all along, and nobody saw the insanity of that tribal council. I know this is probably taking 8 to 10 minutes, but I'm just making a point of how much that was the craziest tribal in the history of Survivor franchise. Normally I don't make videos this long, but I tell you, this was a crazy twist. It got me shocked. I thought it was going to be Geordie, honestly, and not Stevie or Simon once the thing had happened. Once they mentioned Geordie's name, I thought he was going to be a blindside. But an even bigger twist was Fraser going, which pretty much most of America or Australia or the world did not see coming. So Fraser goes home with 3 votes. George plays an idol on himself with 2 votes cast against him that do not count. Stevie gets 2 votes. And that leaves a wild 4 of Fraser and Geordie both voting Stevie, that they thought Stevie was going to go home. Simon and Stevie vote George that do not count. Liz, Shawnee, and George all vote Fraser. And Fraser ends up going home, which no one saw coming in that tribal. It was crazy. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I have to say for now. Bye.